Welcome to a new segment of Wizards of the Tower Roleplay. In this new segment, we're calling it Campaign Tales. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower Roleplay. Campaign Tales, Episode 1. A new segment that we're bringing to you about our campaign in the world to give you ideas for your campaigns and your adventures. I'm Delaney.
And I'm Tom.
I've been gaming since '79.
I'm sort of a newbie. Haven't been gaming since about 2007, 2008 or so. But we decided to bring this sort of campaign tales to you to let you know what we're doing in our Pathfinder game.
Yeah, we hope you enjoy this new segment. And I'd argue that Tom's not a newbie since he's been playing since around 2007, since 3.5 edition. But anyway.
So Delaney, this new Pathfinder campaign that we're on is not a canned adventure.
No.
It's what we would call homebrew.
Right.
And we've talked about homebrews, and we'll probably talk a lot more about them, as we do more segments. But this homebrew campaign is set in the campaign setting of Adain, which is your own invention.
Right.
So Adain is just as complex and multi-layered and is just in world encompassing scope as Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms or any sort of campaign setting. Adain is just as complex, and so one of the things you like to talk about a lot in Adain is where the whole sort of campaign starts.
Yeah. So the world of Adain is, as Tom said, is a complex world. In fact, one of our players, as soon as he saw the information that we had out on our website, said, wow, there's more information here than most store-bought adventures. And it's like, I guess you could say that, because there's stuff in there that I started putting together back in the early to mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And Adain overall, the map changed a little bit from what I originally started. And I think I've probably run about 6 or 7 campaigns out of it total, starting with first edition, second edition, 3.5, mm-hmm. and then of course with Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And you've played in almost all of, I can't say all of them, but you've played in quite a few of the ones that we've had in.
Probably not the earliest ones.
No,
yeah,
not since first edition.
Yeah.
But Adain, the overall concept of it is, a lot of it has grown from some input from other people that have gamed in it. And as I said, the map changed a little bit, but the overall scope of the world was brought about when I was actually doing a LARP group, International mm-hmm. Fantasy Gaming Society.
Okay. And
we in Northern Colorado had our own gaming world that we ran our adventures out of. And some of those ideas, like I said, came out of there. And the way Adain came about is, it's a world that you have, basically, you started off with 2 deities, the mother and the father. They actually have other names, but that's the generic name for
mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah.
And they first created giants in the realm. Giants were the first, not humanoid, but the first, I guess, regular race besides animals and dragons
sure.
and other things. And the giants were given an artifact of great power called the Forge of Life. And the Forge of Life, the giants could then create other life. And the giants, they were actually immortal. The only way they died was from being killed or if they got sick, but they didn't die of old age. And they're still that way in my world. And giants in my world aren't your typical by-the-book Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, where a hill giant is evil and stone giant might be kind of neutral-ish, and a frost and fire giant are evil, and storm and and cloud giants are good.
Yeah.
A giant has his own personality just like anybody else in my realm.
Sure.
And the giants, given this artifact, the Forge of Life, decided that they didn't want to. They got lazy, so they decided to create the dwarves, and the dwarves ended up becoming their slaves of creating things and building things.
Okay.
And the giants got lazier and said, "Well, we don't no longer want to take care of the animals in the land. We'll have the dwarves make some elves."
Okay.
And they taught them how to do it. So you get this conflict between the dwarves and the elves. That dwarves will say that they created the elves, and the elves will say, "No, you didn't, because if the giants didn't create you, and mother and father didn't create the giants, then you wouldn't exist either. So technically, they created us." That's how an elf looks at it. They look at it on the longer term, whereas dwarves look at it on the short term.
Yeah, and I remember that from gameplays, that you have this conflict between dwarves and elves where they're always biting at each other about who was made first.
Right, yeah.
Who's the elder race?
Who's the elder race?
Who's the elder race?
Technically, the giants are the elder race. Yeah. And from there, some giants decided to teach dwarves more of the skills on creating, and the dwarves went nuts and created humans and gnomes and halflings, and then they decided they wanted to create giants, and they ended up messing up and created the ogres and the trolls, and they went further and created the orcs and the goblins and everything else, and you started getting this mish of the humanoid races, which conflict. Now, humans, being humans, decided that giants were a bane on the world and went after the giants with full vengeance. And the other races joined in. Well, the other elves, the dwarves, the halflings, the gnomes all joined in and pretty much wiped the giants out. Many thousands of years passed, and the giants have shown back up. That's a kind of a rough, generic overview. There's been, some chaos that's happened from, magic users trying to gain great power, trying to find the Forge of Life and finding it and causing a lot of problems because they didn't know how to use it properly, which was a campaign that we ran earlier. Mm-hmm. Now,
that's sort of the background of one of the larger campaigns we did, is the corruption of the Forge of Life. Now, how would you describe Edain with regards to the type of world it is? Would you consider it Stone Age, Bronze Age, medieval, something like that?
Yeah, great question. I actually consider Edain to be taking place in almost a European type society. The main campaign is in a very much European society around the 900s or so. Okay. So that's the technology level. There's no guns. There's not much plate armor and plate mail. The dwarves are the only ones that know how to really make that and forge it. Even the elves don't really know how to make and forge it. Mm-hmm. They kind of middled around. They can do it a little bit, but they're not as masterful as the dwarves are. And the dwarves keep that secret.
Sure.
And humans that have plate mail are extremely lucky.
Yeah. I've always thought of it when we talk about the different types of weapons and armor as sort of a late Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Europe.
Right.
With, you've got everything from the very north of Edain, which is the Wildlands, where our current campaign is set. It's set in the Wildlands. And that would be sort of analogous to European Scandinavia. And then you've got the middle area where we've had some campaigns in below the Blackfire Mountains, which is sort of like continental Europe.
Right.
And then we've got the Parconian Empire, which is sort of like
Roman fall.
Kind of like Rome.
Towards its end.
Yeah, almost like Eastern Roman, kind of like Byzantium almost.
Yeah.
An empire. And then you've got these desert lands south of that, and they're sort of desert wastes. And
kind of an Arabic society, further south than that. Well, the desert was at one point very Egyptian-like, and I base my world upon real-world societies. I think a lot of people do.
Sure.
The main world that Tom had played in was at one point was very Celtic in like France and England, and when they ended up having some of the empire come over, kind of the Roman Empire come on over, they advanced their technology and they united and grew and became the most powerful
Sure.
place on the or continent or city or not city state but country in the world. So people pretty much leave them alone. They don't like to fight unless you push them into a corner.
Sure.
The Wildlands, as Tom said, they're kind of a mix between the Scandinavian. So you got a little bit of Viking. You've actually got Old World Celt. You've got Gaul, and then in one part of it you've even got Hun type people, the horse lords.
Yep. Now, there's, if you could imagine traveling south from the main part of Edain, which would be like continental Europe, and then you go to the desert lands even farther south. And then if you keep on going, you actually end up in an area that's sort of almost analogous to like southern Africa. Yet it's almost like a European area, because if we had an actual short part of one campaign that took place down there.
That actually is not like... There are parts of it that are actually like Western Asia, like Afghanistan and Turkey and that part. And then there's a more southern part, which is, once again, it's almost European-esque in a way. There is another part of the world that you guys went into one part that's a jungle world. That's very Aztec and Mayan.
Yeah, that was...
And that's pretty much the known world.
Yeah.
That most players don't even know about, because it's not like everybody goes everywhere and knows everything about everything. They're pretty much limited in scope to where they live and the country that they live in.
So it's really the whole campaign setting is sort of like this large continental mass, with a very varied geographic areas, and then varied types of peoples, races,
right,
and cultural areas and cultural strongholds, and it's set up sort of like a adventure that you can travel from one end to the other and experience just about anything, really.
Pretty much, yeah. And even with the elves, I have my own race of elves.
Yeah.
There are no drow elves. The race of elves, you have what they call the noble elf, which would be kind of like a high elf.
Yeah.
You have the there's another kind of elf that's kind of wood elf. Then there's a thorn elf, which is basically they're almost kind of evil. Their weapons are barbed and thorny. And then you have what we call the desolation elves, which live in the desert.
Yeah.
And then you have black elves, and black elves not meaning drow or their color of their skin, it's the color of their heart. They're evil elves.
Evil, cannibals.
And in some respects, you can kind of take that off. So, little pieces of my realm, I guess, come from a little bit of Warhammer-esque, because they have their black elves, which are evil.
Yeah, they're dark
drow.
elves. Yeah.
Or dark elves, I think, as they call them.
Well, you can't, nothing is created from a vacuum. Everything sort of builds on everything else.
Right. Yeah, all we got to do is look at D&D and what even Gygax took from Tolkien and from Conan and
Robert Howard.
Robert E. Howard, right, and all the other fantasy writers out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a fantasy author that doesn't get a lot of credit, of course, very often, and that's Michael Moorcock.
Right.
And that's vaguely mentioned in some of the D&D lore. At the very early part, of course, they mention a little bit about John Carter of Mars and that, but Barsoomians. But they also mention Michael Moorcock's world, where Elric is in.
Right, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser.
Yeah,
Fritz Lieber.
From Fritz Lieber, yeah.
Paul Anderson.
Yeah.
3 Hearts and 3 Lions.
So, nothing starts in a vacuum. Everything sort of builds off from one end to the other.
Right.
But what always strikes me so much about the worlds you create is you start from an idea, and then you work out and you populate it with deities, seasons, days of the year, holidays, special foods.
The days of the week actually even have names too, which most people don't get into.
Yeah, religious festivals,
holidays.
Various roads to travel, cities to be in.
Some of the drinks that are available.
Sure, it's a fully fledged world.
Right. Even some of the mundane animals that exist. You don't have just your elk and your deer and your bear. There's varieties. For an example, one of the players in the campaign's got what is called a dun bear, and it's because the bear is actually dun colored with spots and stripes, almost like what they imagine a saber-tooth or a Smilodon might have had.
Yeah.
So they're almost that same color, but they're very much like a grizzly in some respects too.
Kind of like an ancient earth animal, you know, something a prehistoric animal, you know, with an unusual fur and stripe marks on it before it became the sort of modern equivalent to what we have today.
Right, and even the monsters, when we first started the campaign, there were very limited types of monsters, and that ended up coming about because of some chaos, some crazy magic that happened because of fiddling with the Forge of Life.
Well, that brings out wild magic and stuff, but maybe we shouldn't get so far into that.
No, we won't, not now.
But we wanted to open this episode 1 of Campaign Tales, explaining the campaign setting, which is the Dane, and where, you know, sort of the background of the geographic area where we're going to be explaining about our current Pathfinder game, the Wildlands game.
Right. And how I came up with the idea for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's probably something for another episode, though.
Yeah, we'll hit upon that. But for now, I think we're going to end this episode of Campaign Tales 1, Wizards of the Tower Roleplay. We hope that all your adventures are epic, and keep on role-playing.
Thanks, folks.